Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm going to show you how to cross-tabulate two multiple response questions using pivot table. So in a survey where you have two variables which have multiple response questions and you want to cross-tabulate that, how do you handle that? So in my previous video, I've covered how to analyze multiple response questions where you are able to cross-tabulate each of the multiple response question with single response questions. But here, a subscriber reached out to me asking how she can cross-tabulate two separate multiple response questions in a pivot table. Alright, so if you've watched my previous videos on multiple response questions, you realize that where we have more than one multiple response question, we unpivot into separate tables. So the challenge is that that one works where you want to cross-tabulate with single response questions in the same survey. But where you have two multiple response questions and you want to cross-tabulate, it may not work. So how do you do that? All right. So before we go on, it's good to really understand how how to summarize the multiple response question in using Excel. So if you check the previous video, what we do is that we kind of stack the data by making and pivoting it, which increases the number of rows. So let's understand how it works. That will really help us. All right. So in my case, I have a simple survey data where I have two multiple response questions. One is on social media platforms that the respondents use, and two is their perception of how they feel about the usage of this platform. So we want to answer the question whether there's a pattern or some correlation or relationship between specific platforms and how users feel, report about how they feel. All right. So with this, the first multiple response question has 11 choices that respondents were presented. The second one has 17 where they were supposed to pick all that apply. All right, and we have 11. We have 1,000 respondents in the survey. So when we pivot in order to summarize the multiple response question, what Power Query does is that it will duplicate the number of choices times the number of rows that are in our data. So we'll end up getting somewhere like 11,000 rows after pivoting the first multiple response question. All right. Then the second one, when we unpivot it in the same table, what will happen is that it will also now increase the number of rows. So after our first pivoting, we'll get 11,000 rows. The second one will take it up to 187,000 rows. So as we continue pivoting, depending on the number of multiple response questions we have in the survey data, the number of rows also keep going. It can even go into millions depending on number of respondents you have in your data and the number of choices for each of the multiple response questions that you have in the data. All right, but we all know that Excel can handle only up to 1 million rows in an Excel spreadsheet. But Power Query doesn't have a limit in terms of how large the number of rows could be. So it means that we can analyze millions of rows using Power Query. But that depends on your PC's capability, the processor, as well as in terms of the storage that is available for it to be able to process that large of data. But Power Query, you wouldn't have that 1 million limitation. But then if you have data where the rows are up to 1 million and you have to really view the data in an Excel sheet or spreadsheet, then you have that limitation. So how do we handle that? All right. So before we go into that, so you realize that the number of choices that you present to respondents in a survey or in a multiple response question will really have an impact when you are analyzing. So, and even the standard practice is that having so many multiple choice options for respondents may influence a lot of bias, especially when it's online survey where respondents will have to do that for themselves. There could be so many bias or errors that could come in. So I encourage that always try your best web applicable to have as minimal number of responses as possible. If you have so many, sometimes it's a bit complicated, and oftentimes too, some of the choices could be the same thing, or they could be referring to the same thing. So if it's face to face, you can kind of reduce some errors that will come with respondents picking the options themselves. All right. So now, how do we handle two multiple response questions when we want to cross-tabulate it in pivot table? All right. So let's dive in. So first, just load your data to Power Query. So once you load it to Power Query, let's name it data. Let's name it data 3. All right. So once you do that, what you can do is you realize that in our the column ID, we have unique IDs which identify individual cases in the data. All right. So in our case, the cases are the participants of the survey. So in the previous video about analyzing multiple response questions, the approach we used was that if we have more than one multiple response questions in the survey data and we want to analyze each of them, what we did previously was that we unpivot each of the multiple response questions in separate tables. So, and that was perfect for cases where we wouldn't need to cross-tabulate two separate multiple response questions. But here we want to cross-tabulate two multiple response questions. So if these questions are unpivoted in separate tables, there will be a challenge. Why? Because when you unpivot, this unique IDs duplicate. So if you have one table where the IDs are duplicated, another table too, the IDs are duplicated, in that case, if you want to really establish relationship between these two tables, then you have a challenge, because Power Query doesn't work with many-to-many relationship. So in that case, you can't connect these two tables together and work with in terms of relationship. But then maybe you can do some other twist if that's really efficient, or that approach will work. So that's 1. 2, when you unpivot, because the number of choices of those responses of those multiple response questions may not, or are likely not to be the same, you end up getting the rows numbers different. So in that case, since the row numbers are different, when you cross-tabulate, you may not really make any sense out of the data. So how do we fix this? So here what we do is that instead of unpivoting separately, for us to have the two multiple response questions and be able to cross-tabulate, they need to be in the same table and appear in separate columns. So what it means is that we have to unpivot each of the multiple response questions that we want to work with or cross-tabulate in the same table. So, but then, as I explained earlier, when you unpivot in one table and want to unpivot again, the rows keep increasing. There's no problem with that, because Power Query can handle as many rows as possible and even bypass the 1 million rows. But then the challenge could be your processing, your machine, your PC, whether it has that capability to handle such a workload of data. So, for example, when you are analyzing, you are filtering, Power Query will have to filter these millions of rows. And if your processor is not that fast, or it doesn't have the storage, you don't have enough storage to kind of handle this, the technical limitation could come in, but not like Power Query having limitation with the number of rows. So we can unpivot as many times as possible and have millions of rows. But then the question is whether your machine can handle that. All right. So now what we need to do is to unpivot the first multiple response question, and then after that we do it for the second in that order, depending on number of responses, multiple response questions we have. So in our case, our multiple response question came in just a single column where each selection is separated by a comma delimiter. I've covered different kinds of multiple response questions. You can check out my video on multiple response questions. So what we did previously was that we splitted each selection into separate columns, and thereafter we unpivoted. So which involves two steps. You split and you unpivot. But in this video, I'm going to show you one trick that will help you reduce the steps by 1. So here, instead of splitting by column, we wouldn't need to do that, and then we can still get the same result as previously. For those who also have multiple response question appearing in a single column and separated by space delimiter, you can also work around. I think I covered a video on that. You can check it out. Then also for those who have like multiple columns, you need to pivot straightforward, and then you also get a single column. All right, so let's continue. So let's click on split column by delimiter. So here our delimiter is comma. Okay, so instead of separating into splitting into two columns, we have to split by rows. So in that case, if we split into columns like the previous video, we will need to then also pivot back to a single column. So that will be 2 steps. But if we split into rows, we will skip the pivoting, and then we'll still get the same result like before. All right, then we go to the second multiple response question. So here you see that our number of rows have gone to 10,000 plus because we've pivoted. So from 1,000 respondents, the rows have gone up to 10,000 plus. So a Power Query, you can have as many rows as possible, but then you may not be able to view all the rows in the data. So you have to take note of that. All right. Then we also have so the second one too, we split by delimiter, and our delimiter is comma. Go to advanced, click on rows and grade. So we have split that one too into 2. So that's it. So if we have another one, we'll continue like that, but just know that the number of rows will keep multiplying. All right, so once we do that, we'll go to close and load to data model. All right, so this is where you need to take note. So you see by default it will select table. So what this means is that if we proceed and even add this to data model, the pivot table we have will go to data model, where Power Query will store the data for us, and it will also load the data into a new Excel sheet as a data if you proceed with the table. So that means is that you have another table with that thousands of rows. So if you had gotten millions of rows and you are selecting the table Excel cannot handle the million rows. So in that case, you can't work. So you wouldn't even need to load the data as a table, because you wouldn't probably need to do any cleaning there, unless maybe some analysis you may have to refer to your unpivoted data in a form of Excel sheets. That's probably you may have to load that. But I advise, most commonly you rarely need to do that. So we can also decide to establish connection. So if we create connection, what it means is that the data will only connect to the Power Query data that we have. So whatever analysis we are doing, it will be fetching it from the data model, right? So if we do that, we can add it to a data model, and then it will only be a connection. So we wouldn't have the data wouldn't be loading into Excel. It will only be connected to it on the Power Query. All right. So we can also just go straight to generate a pivot table report. So that one too, the data will be in the data model, where it will always fetch the data without loading into Excel. So with that, we can have as many rows that our machine can handle. All right, so we want to generate a pivot table report in an existing sheet. We want to put our table here. So we just scroll down and then select where we want to place it. Click OK. So if you check on the right, you see that you can go to data, queries and connections to see the number of rows. So if it's check, we are having 1,000 rows, 1,000 number of respondents. So after I'm pivoting the 2 multiple response columns, we are now having like 53 plus 1,000 rows, right? So you can always check this. So what it means is that anytime you refresh, all these rows will load. So that's where your processor and all that will come in. All right. So let's generate our pivot table report. So just click on all, you see all the tables that you have in your data model. So this is our data tray. So we want to cross-tabulate which of the following social media platform do you use. So we have our platform, click and drop this here, and then we also have the how they feel. Then we can, depending on how we want to segment the data. So let's put the platforms on columns and then how they feel on rows. All right. Then so we have that. Then we count by column ID. Pick this one and drop it here. So we have to count by distinct count. All right, very important. So note that my data, you see that most of the frequencies are quite similar. This data is a dummy data that I generated, randomly generated as test data from Qualtrics. So just for this purposes. But if you have a real life data, you wouldn't really have most frequencies showing a bit closer in that. All right, so here, based on your hypothesis, that will determine if you should take percentages by row totals or percentages by column totals. So, but mostly, most software normally they kind of have like, they mostly the output is not mostly the banner is those categories that or subgroups that you are interested in will be in the column, and then the attribute or parameter that you want to see will be on rows. So here, if our hypothesis is that Facebook users are more likely to report being depressed or whatever. So in that case, we want to see out of the total number of respondents, which is 527, who say they use Facebook, how many of them are more likely to report being depressed and so on. So in that case, we'll take percentage by what? Column total. All right. So you see that this table is quite bigger and uncomfortable. So it's very good to always try to work around. One trick of data analysis is data reduction. So there are so many ways we can tackle this. So one way is that we can decide to split the table into 3 or 4. One will be that attributes or feelings that are reported positive, we can group that as a separate table. Then another one to negative, mixed and neutral. So in that case, we can split the table into 3 to make it very easy to consume the data and get a pattern. Then you can also decide to remove the other or which other and rearrange base. You can even arrange the platform based on common usage. So you can then have your data just like how I've regrouped it. So you can use conditional formatting or whichever way to really see a pattern. All right. So I regrouped here by emotions that are positive, right? So here the key takeaway could be that most of them are more they are reporting most social media platform users they report being kind of happy, and you can also look at those who are reporting less. So example like this one, you have like most of them are reporting less frequency for the positive emotion. So you can just get a pattern out of that. So it's good to really break down your data to make sense of that rather than dealing with a very big table like this. All right. One thing you must note, however, is that since we are breaking this data by social media platforms, in most cross-tabulation, statistically we sometimes need or it's good to always check if there are differences in the subgroups. So for example, if most people are reporting, let's say if we take those who report being happy, for instance, we may want to check if there exists any difference between WhatsApp users who reported being happy and any other platform. So with this kind of cross-tabulation, you have to be very careful because there's a bit of dependency. Respondents who selected this are also those who selected this. So they kind of tested two parameters at the same time. So depending on which significant testing you want to do, you have to be a bit careful, because the percentages we are also having are based on those who really said they use WhatsApp. But then also know that in your analysis we unpivoted and the number of rows kind of increase, repeating some of the participants. So in that case, the sample size you use in your significant testing should be based on the actual number of respondents or who selected or the subgroup. So it's very important to really take that into consideration. So technically, I'm not really convinced about this cross tabulation when it comes to significant testing, but where applicable you can still try to test for significance, column wise significance, where you take Facebook like this for anxious. You can just decide to see if Facebook, those who report being anxious, are significantly different from any other platform for that parameter. So that's why it's called the column comparison. Right, so you can do statistical testing for that, but just know that since we unpivoted, your reference should be on the number of respondents for the total sample, or the number of respondents for that subgroup, but not the total number of frequencies that we have at the end after the unpivot. And it's very good to take that into consideration. All right, so that is it, and thank you. Bye.